Renee Whitaker was counting coins in the dark when her daughter asked if they were still homeless. She froze, not because she did not know the answer, but because no mother wants to tell her child the truth from the front seat of a minivan. They were parked behind a laundromat outside Macon, Georgia. The engine was off to save gas. Rain tapped against the windshield. In the back, 12-year-old Maddie lay under two thin blankets, pretending she was not cold. Renee had $6 in her wallet. $6. And a county letter she was too tired to open. When she finally unfolded it, she expected another warning, another bill, another official reminder that poor people are always one missed payment away from losing something. Instead, the letter said an old farmhouse had been left in her name, forgotten, damaged, nearly erased from county records. But before she could claim it, one final balance had to be paid. $11.18. Not the price of the house, the unpaid tax balance. By the next afternoon, Renee had borrowed the rest in coins and put her name back on record. And for the first time in months, her daughter had a door that locked. Then the white truck appeared. A man stepped out near the back field and took pictures of the land. 2 days later, a lawyer's card was tucked into the screen door. Renee thought she had inherited shelter. Her relatives knew she had inherited something far more dangerous. And if you believe a woman like Renee should not have to fight alone just to keep the one door she finally has, subscribe before the people with lawyers try to take it from her. Renee did not answer Maddie right away. She kept her eyes on the coins in her palm, as if $6 could become something else if she stared long enough. Behind her, in the back of the minivan, Maddie waited, not like a child waiting for comfort, like a child who had already learned that some answers were too heavy for her mother to say out loud. That was what hurt Renee most. Not the van, not the cold, not the stiff ache in her back from sleeping upright. It was the way her 12-year-old daughter had started asking grown-up questions in a careful little voice. Are we still homeless? Renee wanted to say no. She wanted to say they were just between places, just having a hard month, just waiting for something to turn. But the laundromat behind them was closed. Their clothes were packed in plastic totes. Maddie's school shoes were lined up on the floorboard like she still had a bedroom to wake up in. So Renee did the only thing she could do. She reached back, pulled the blanket higher over Maddie's shoulder, and opened the county letter. The envelope had been sitting in her purse since afternoon. She had picked it up from the temporary mailing address she used behind a check cashing place in Macon. Most days, that little mailbox only held reminders of what she could not fix. Late notices, storage warnings, medical bills with bold red boxes around the amount due. This envelope looked the same at first. Plain white. County seal. Her name printed too neatly. Renee had almost left it unopened. Official letters had stopped bringing answers. They brought countdowns. But this one did not begin with her name. It began with Alma Reeves. Renee went still. The name belonged to her mother's side of the family. The side people only discussed when someone died, or when land was involved. Alma had been Renee's great-aunt. The difficult one, that was what the family called her. Difficult, stubborn, hard to deal with. But Renee remembered only pieces. A narrow porch, red clay on her shoes, a biscuit wrapped in a napkin, her mother driving home in silence afterward, with both hands tight on the wheel. The letter said an old farmhouse outside Barron County had been left in Renee's name. The property file could be cleared for transfer once the remaining county balance was paid. Renee read that sentence twice. Then she found the amount. 11美元18美分. For a moment, she thought she had misunderstood. $11.18. Not the price of the house. Not a deposit. Not rent. A leftover county tax balance on a forgotten farmhouse no one had bothered to finish claiming. Renee looked down at the coins in her palm. $6. That was all she had. And somehow, for the first time in months, $6 felt close to something instead of far from everything. She did not smile. Hope had embarrassed her before. It had come dressed as extra shifts, payment plans, family promises, and people who said they would call back. Still, her eyes moved to Maddie. Her daughter was quiet now, watching her from the shadows of the back seat. Renee did not tell her about the farmhouse yet. Not fully. She had learned not to hand a child hope until she knew it could hold weight. So she folded the letter carefully, slower than necessary. And that was when she noticed the small line near the bottom of the second page. Copies mailed to interested parties. Renee read it again. Interested parties. She did not know who that meant. Not yet. Maybe it was just county language. Maybe every notice said that. Maybe some clerk had typed it without thinking. But the word settled cold in her stomach, because Renee knew something about people. Most of them were not interested when you were sleeping in a van. They became interested when they thought you had touched something they wanted. She slid the letter back into the envelope and tucked it away from the late notices, as if keeping it separate could protect it from the rest of her life. Then she counted the money again. $6. She needed $5.18 more. A ridiculous amount. A tiny amount. The kind of amount people dropped into tip jars without thinking. But to Renee, it had become the distance between her daughter and a locked door. Maddie shifted under the blanket. Renee reached back and touched her shoe gently, the way she used to touch her shoulder when they still had a bedroom and a lamp beside the bed. She did not promise anything. Not yet. She only looked through the windshield at the empty parking lot and held onto one thought. By morning, she had to find $5.18. By noon, she might have her name on a house. And by the time she understood who those interested parties were, it would already be too late for her to disappear quietly again. The last $5.18 did not come easily. Renee had to gather it in pieces, the same way her life had been coming apart. $2 came from a woman folding towels at the laundromat who looked at Maddie sleeping in the van and did not ask for an explanation. A man refilling the vending machine traded Renee's loose nickels and dimes for bills. The gas station cashier pushed 73 cents from the little dish by the register toward her like it was nothing. But it was not nothing. Not that morning. That morning, every coin sounded like a step toward a door she had not seen yet. Renee did not tell Maddie everything as they drove toward Barron County. She only said there was an old family property they needed to check. Her voice stayed calm, almost plain. Maddie looked out the window and nodded. She had learned that when her mother sounded careful, where hope was somewhere nearby, but not safe enough to touch. The county office sat inside a low brick building beside the courthouse, with a flag out front and two old men talking near the steps. Inside, the air smelled like floor cleaner, old paper, and air conditioning turned too high. Renee stood at the counter with the letter folded in both hands. The clerk typed the file number into her computer. Then she paused. Not long, just long enough for Renee to feel it. The clerk asked Renee to confirm her full name. Renee did. Then the clerk looked back at the screen and explained that notices had been mailed to other listed parties, but the balance could still be cleared by the recorded heir. Other listed parties. Renee remembered the small line from the bottom of the letter. Copies mailed to interested parties. She wanted to ask who they were, but the clerk was already waiting for payment. So Renee placed the money on the counter. Bills first, then quarters, then dimes, then the last 3 pennies. $11.18. The clerk counted it without expression. Then came the sound Renee would remember. A stamp hitting paper. Small. Official. Final. The clerk slid the receipt back across the counter and told her the property file would show the balance cleared. That was all. No kind speech. No miracle. No warm music swelling in the background. Just a receipt. But Renee held it carefully, because for months, every paper with her name on it had meant loss, eviction, debt, warning, removal. This one meant entry. This one meant she could go in. The farmhouse waited almost 40 minutes from town, down a road that narrowed past pecan trees, rusted mailboxes, and ditches full of high grass. The farther they drove, the quieter Maddie became. Then Renee saw it. A farmhouse at the end of a gravel drive, half hidden behind weeds and leaning fence posts. The paint had faded into a tired gray. One shutter hung crooked. Vines had climbed the side wall and curled around a broken gutter. Renee did not try to make it sound better than it was. The place looked tired, damp, forgotten, but it was standing. And after months in a minivan, standing counted. Before Renee let Maddie step inside, she checked the porch boards with her foot. She looked for broken glass. She pushed the door open slowly and waited for anything to move. The air inside was stale and heavy. Dust floated through a strip of afternoon light. The floorboards complained under their shoes. A chair lay on its side in the kitchen. The sink was stained brown around the drain. Something had chewed the corner of a cabinet door. Maddie stayed close at first. Then she drifted toward a small room near the back hallway. The wallpaper had faded flowers on it. One corner of the ceiling had a water stain. The closet door was missing its knob. A dead moth rested on the windowsill like it had been waiting there for years. Maddie stood in the doorway for a long time. Then she asked if that room could be hers. Renee felt the answer catch in her throat. She wanted to apologize. For the stain, for the missing knob, for the smell of dust, for offering her daughter a room that still looked abandoned. But Maddie was not looking at what was broken. She was looking at where her backpack could stay. So Renee nodded. That was all she trusted herself to do. For the next hour, they worked without calling it work. Renee swept broken plaster into a pile. Maddie wiped the window ledge with an old t-shirt. They opened drawers and found rusted utensils, mouse droppings, yellowed grocery coupons, and one chipped coffee mug with Alma's initials faded near the handle. The house did not become clean. Not yet, but it became less empty. Near sunset, Renee carried 2 blankets inside from the van. She placed Maddie's backpack against the wall of the little back room. Maddie stared at it for a moment, as if she needed proof that it would still be there in the morning. That night, they slept on the floor of the front room. The house creaked around them. Something scratched once inside a wall. The wind pressed softly against the windows. Renee stayed awake after Maddie fell asleep. She listened to the house breathe. Then she rose quietly and walked to the front door. The old lock resisted. Renee lifted the handle, turned the key, and waited. The bolt slid into place. Metal into wood. A small sound. A holy sound, if a tired mother was allowed to call anything holy. For the first time in months, Renee was not locking herself inside a vehicle. She was locking the world outside a home. She leaned her forehead against the door and finally let out the breath she had been holding since the laundromat. But morning changed the house. Renee stepped into the kitchen and looked through the cloudy back window. Fresh tire tracks cut through the damp ground near the field. They had not been there the night before, and they did not lead to the farmhouse. They led behind it. Renee did not step outside right away. She stood at the kitchen window with one hand resting on the sink, staring at the tire tracks pressed into the wet ground behind the house. They were too fresh to ignore. 2 clean lines cut through the grass near the back field, then curved away from the farmhouse as if whoever drove there had known exactly where to go. Not to the porch, not to the front door, not to the windows. Behind the house, Renee looked over her shoulder at Maddie, still asleep on the floor beneath a blanket, one arm tucked under her cheek. For a moment, Renee told herself it could have been nothing. A neighbor, a county worker, someone lost on the wrong road. But lost people did not drive carefully around an old smokehouse. Lost people did not stop near the back fence. She waited until Maddie woke before going outside. Then she made breakfast from crackers, peanut butter, and the last 2 apples from the cooler. She kept her voice light. She did not mention the tracks. Mothers, learn when to share fear, and when to carry it quietly for 1 more hour. After Maddie ate, Renee walked the yard. The morning air smelled of damp grass, old wood and soil turned soft from the night. The farmhouse looked different in daylight. Still broken, still tired, but less like a stranger. Renee followed the tire marks past the smokehouse. The small building leaned to one side, its tin roof rusted red at the edges. Weeds crowded the doorway. Beyond it, the land opened into a rough back field, bordered by trees and an old fence line that had almost disappeared into brush. That was where the tracks stopped. Not at a gate, not at a shed, not at anything Renee could understand. Just open land. She crouched beside one tire mark and touched the mud with 2 fingers. Fresh. A cold feeling moved through her. Someone had come while she and Maddie were sleeping inside. Someone had stood out here in the dark, close enough to see the farmhouse, close enough to know they were there. Renee went back inside and locked the door. For the next few days, she tried to make the house livable without letting the unease take over. She cleaned the front room, hauled out a torn rug, swept mouse droppings from the kitchen drawers, set the chipped coffee mug with Alma's faded initials on the windowsill because throwing it away felt wrong. Maddie helped wipe dust from the baseboards in her room. She did not complain about the smell. She did not ask when the water would be fixed. She did not say the house was scary. That was Maddie's way of being brave. And Renee hated that a child had become so good at it. By the third afternoon, the farmhouse had begun to show small signs of life. A blanket over the front window, a broom by the door, Maddie's backpack resting in the little room like a quiet claim. Then Renee found the card. It was tucked into the screen door. White, crisp, clean. Too clean for that house. She pulled it free and read the name printed in black letters. Calder, Voss, and Lyle Attorneys at Law. No handwritten note. No phone message. No explanation. Just a business card left where she would have to find it. Renee stood very still. The yard was quiet, the road empty. A crow called once from the pecan tree near the fence. She turned the card over. Blank. That frightened her more than a threat would have. A threat at least told you what someone wanted. This was different. This was a person letting her know she had been noticed. That evening, Renee placed the card on Alma's kitchen table beside the stamped receipt for $11.18. The two pieces of paper did not look like they belonged in the same world. One was thin and ordinary, printed by a county clerk. The other was thick, expensive, and sharp at the corners. But somehow, both had her name caught between them. 2 days later, the letter arrived. It came in a cream-colored envelope with the same law firm printed in the corner. Renee opened it, standing at the kitchen counter while Maddie sat in the next room, drawing flowers around the edges of an old notebook page. The words were polite. That was the first thing Renee noticed. There had been a misunderstanding regarding the Reeves estate. Her occupancy of the farmhouse might be premature. Certain family members questioned whether the transfer reflected Alma's true intent. Renee should avoid making improvements until the matter was reviewed. Then came the offer. $7,500 for relocation assistance. If she agreed to leave the property and sign away any claim before the issue became costly. Renee read that number twice. $7,500. Enough to make a desperate woman stop breathing. Enough for a motel, a deposit, groceries, a used tire for the van. A little space between today and disaster. For a few seconds, the offer looked like mercy. Then Renee looked around the room, at the broom, at the blankets, at Maddie's notebook on the floor, at the backpack in the little room near the hallway. Nobody had offered her $7,500 when she was sleeping behind the laundromat. Nobody had offered help when Maddie needed a bed. Nobody had remembered family when Renee had nothing but a van and $6. So why now? Renee folded the letter and set it beside the business card. The answer was not in the farmhouse walls. Not yet. It was somewhere behind the house, where the tire tracks had stopped. And for the first time, Renee understood that the broken place she had claimed for shelter might already be part of a fight she had not been told about. Renee waited until Maddie was busy before she went back outside. Her daughter sat cross-legged in the little back room, drawing flowers in the margin of an old notebook page. The room still smelled like dust. The wall still had a stain shaped like spilled tea. But Maddie had placed her backpack beside the closet and lined her pencils on the floor like she was trying to make order out of whatever this place gave her. Renee watched her for a moment. Then she slipped the lawyer's letter into her purse and stepped into the yard. The farmhouse looked harmless from the road. That was the strange part. It looked like the kind of place people forgot on purpose. A sagging porch, a broken shutter, weeds crowding the steps. Nothing about it said money. Nothing about it said fight. But the tire tracks behind the house said something else. Renee followed them past the smokehouse again. This time, she kept walking. The ground dipped slightly behind the old building, then rose toward the back field. Grass brushed against her calves. Burrs caught on the hem of her jeans. Near the tree line, she saw something she had missed before. A thin strip of orange tape tied to a wooden stake. Then another. Then another. They were small. Easy to overlook if a person was only looking at the house. Renee stood still. The stakes did not circle the farmhouse. They did not mark the porch, the well, or the collapsed shed. They ran along the edge of the back field. As if someone had been tracing a path, she did not touch them. Something about those little orange flags felt official in a way she did not understand. and personal in a way she did. A truck slowed on the road behind her. Renee turned quickly. It was not the white truck from before. This one was older, blue, dusty. The driver was an elderly black man in a faded cap, his left arm resting out the open window. He did not drive in at first. He stopped near the mailbox and looked at Renee for a few seconds. Not rudely, just carefully, like a man deciding how much trouble a conversation might bring. Then he eased the truck into the drive. Renee stayed where she was. The man introduced himself as Hollis Crane. He lived 2 properties down, past the bend where the pine trees thickened. His voice was low, measured, and tired in the way older men sound when they have seen the same kind of greed wear different faces. He said he had known Alma, not well enough to claim closeness, well enough to know she was not crazy. That was the first thing he said that made Renee's throat tighten, because nobody in the family ever began with that. They always began with difficult. Hollis looked past the farmhouse toward the orange flags. Then he said the thing Renee would carry back inside like a lit match. People had been coming around that back field for months. Not for the house, for what sat behind it. He did not explain everything. Maybe he did not know everything. Maybe he knew more than he wanted to say in a yard where sound could travel. But he told Renee enough. There was a larger tract of land beyond Alma's old place. Family land, mostly. Rough acres that had sat quiet for years until a developer started asking questions. Storage buildings, rental cabins, service access. Hollis had heard different versions depending on who was doing the talking. But the important part was not what they wanted to build. The important part was how they wanted to get there. Hollis pointed toward the narrow rise behind the smokehouse. That was when Renee noticed it. Not a road exactly. More like the memory of one. A shallow line in the grass where wheels had passed before. It cut from the back of the farmhouse parcel toward the trees, almost hidden now, but still there if a person knew where to look. Hollis said Alma had argued about that strip for years. Men came with papers. Relatives came with promises. One lawyer came with a smile too wide for his face. Alma sent them away every time. Renee listened without interrupting. The wind moved through the dry grass. Somewhere behind the trees, a dog barked once and went quiet. Hollis looked at the house, then at Renee. He said people were always comfortable calling an old woman stubborn when she refused to sign away something they wanted. Then he got back in his truck. No dramatic warning. No full explanation. No neat answer. Just that. By the time his truck disappeared down the road, Renee was still standing beside the orange flags. The farmhouse behind her looked smaller now, but the land around it felt larger, more awake, more watched. Renee walked back inside slowly. Maddie looked up from her notebook, but Renee only smiled and told her everything was fine. It was not a lie exactly. It was a mother's delay. At the kitchen table, Renee took out the lawyer's letter and read it again. This time, the polite words looked different. Misunderstanding, premature occupancy, relocation assistance. They were not asking her to leave because the farmhouse was worthless. They were asking before she understood why it was not. And that night, long after Maddie fell asleep, Renee looked through the back window toward the dark field and saw a small orange flag moving in the wind like someone had left a warning there for her to find. That night, Renee did not sleep much. The orange flags kept moving in her mind, not because she understood them fully, but because she understood enough. Someone had been walking the land before she ever arrived. Someone had been measuring. Someone had been planning. And now the lawyer's letter on Alma's kitchen table felt less like a warning and more like a door being pushed from the other side. By morning, Renee decided to clean, not because the house was ready to become a home, because her hands needed something to do. Fear sat heavier when she stood still. She started in the hallway, where dust had settled thick along the baseboards and spiderwebs hung in the corners like old lace. Maddie helped for a while, wiping the lower walls with a damp cloth, humming softly under her breath. Renee did not tell her about Hollis Crane. Not yet. Maddie already carried too much in her face when she thought no one was watching. Renee refused to add a developer, a lawyer, and a family land dispute to a 12-year-old girl's breakfast. So she gave Maddie the smallest job she could make feel important. Sort the usable things from the broken things. Maddie took that seriously. She made piles on the floor. One for keeping, one for trash, one for maybe. The maybe pile grew fastest. That felt right for the house. Almost everything inside it seemed to belong between loss and possibility. Renee opened drawers that had not been touched in years. She found a rusted can opener, a bundle of birthday candles melted together, a cracked measuring cup, and a yellowed church bulletin folded around a recipe for peach preserves. Alma's life came back in pieces. Not warm pieces. Not enough to know her. Just enough to feel the shape of a woman who had lived quietly and kept things longer than other people thought necessary. In the hallway, Renee wiped dust from a narrow shelf built into the wall. Behind a chipped blue vase, she found a photograph in a warped wooden frame. The glass was cracked across one corner. Renee almost set it aside. Then she saw her mother. Della Whitaker stood on Alma's porch, much younger than Renee remembered her being. Her hair was pulled back. Her mouth was closed tight. One hand rested at her side, gripping what looked like a folded paper. Beside her stood Alma Reeves. Thin, straight-backed, unsmiling. Alma's hand rested lightly on Della's shoulder. Not for posing, for steadying. Renee sat down on the hallway floor. For a while, she forgot the dust, forgot the orange flags, forgot the lawyer's card. She only stared at her mother's face. Della had never looked like that in the few photographs Renee still owned. In those, she was tired, smiling for birthdays, squinting in sunlight, holding Renee on her hip outside a church picnic. But in this picture, Della looked wounded, not crying. Worse, trying not to. Renee turned the frame over. A strip of paper had been tucked into the back, folded once and browned at the edge. She pulled it free carefully. Only 3 words were written on it. After they came, no date, no explanation. Just that. Renee read the words again. After they came, the house seemed quieter around her. From the back room, Maddie called out to ask whether a chipped coffee tin should go in the maybe pile. Renee answered yes, though her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. She looked back at the photograph. All her life, she had heard the same version of Alma. Alma was difficult. Alma was stubborn. Alma did not trust family. Alma made everything harder than it needed to be. But nobody ever said who came. Nobody ever said what they wanted. Nobody ever said why Della left Alma's porch looking like someone had just taken something from her without touching her body. Renee slipped the paper into her purse, beside the lawyer's letter. Then she rose and kept cleaning. Not faster, more carefully. The house no longer felt like a pile of old belongings. It felt like a place that had been trying to speak under years of dust. She opened the small cabinet near the hallway and found envelopes tied with twine. Most were ordinary. Electric bills, property tax notices, receipts for seed, flour, roofing nails. But Alma had written dates on everything. Every envelope, every folded bill, every receipt. It was the habit of someone who expected the past to be questioned. Renee carried the stack to the kitchen table. Maddie wandered in and saw the photograph. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Maddie touched the cracked glass lightly and asked if that was Grandma Della. Renee nodded. She wanted to tell Maddie a simple story. That her grandmother had been loved. That family had been fair. That old photographs only held memories, not warnings. But the farmhouse had already started taking simple stories away. So Renee said only that Della had been young there, and Alma had been standing beside her. That was enough for now. Late that afternoon, Renee found one more thing. Not hidden. Not exactly. A small brass key taped underneath the drawer of the hallway table. It had been placed so neatly that it did not feel lost. It felt saved. Renee peeled away the brittle tape and held the key in her palm. It was older than the house keys she had been given. Smaller, too. The kind that belonged to a cabinet, a box, or some locked place people forgot to check. Maddie looked at it and whispered that maybe it opened treasure. Renee almost smiled. Almost. But her eyes moved toward the dark space beneath the back stairs, where the pantry door sat half-shadowed behind stacked jars and old flour tins. She had passed it a dozen times already. Now, with the little brass key in her hand, it looked less like storage, and more like Alma had been waiting for someone to notice. Renee did not try the key right away. She wanted to. The feeling was there in her hand. Small, cold, and impossible to ignore. But Maddie was standing beside her with wide eyes, already turning the key into a story before Renee knew what it opened. And Renee had learned to be careful with stories, especially hopeful ones. So she slipped the brass key into the pocket of her cardigan and told Maddie they needed to finish the hallway first. Maddie frowned a little. Then she went back to the maybe pile. For the rest of the afternoon, Renee worked with that key pressing against her hip like a secret. Every time she bent to lift a box or wipe a shelf, she felt it there. Not heavy, not sharp, just present, waiting. By evening, the farmhouse had grown dim around them. The rooms turned blue at the edges. The kitchen window held a pale reflection of Renee's face, older than she remembered feeling, tired in a way sleep could not fix. She made supper from canned soup warmed on the hot plate. Maddie ate quietly at Alma's kitchen table, swinging one foot beneath the chair. She had drawn flowers around the word, maybe on a scrap of paper, and placed it beside her pile, as if even broken things deserved a label that did not give up on them. Renee saw it, and for a moment, the ache in her chest softened. After supper, Maddie fell asleep faster than usual. The day had been too much. The new room, the photograph, the strange little key, the house itself pressing old questions into every corner. Renee waited until her daughter's breathing settled. Then she took the key from her pocket. The pantry beneath the back stairs was narrow and low, half hidden behind shelves of cloudy jars, rusted flour tins, and a broom with most of its straw missing. Renee had passed it several times and thought nothing of it. Now she moved slowly, not because she expected treasure, because the house had already taught her that ordinary things were not always ordinary. She pulled aside the jars first. Un by un, dust rose in soft gray puffs. Something dry skittered behind the wall. The air smelled of old wood, metal lids, and the sour trace of food that had spoiled years ago. At the bottom shelf, behind two dented tins, she found it, a small door built into the lower wall. So low she had to kneel to see it properly. The door had been painted the same dull color as the pantry wall, but age had betrayed it. A thin line showed along the edge. A keyhole sat just above a small iron pull. Renee held her breath. Then she slipped the brass key into the lock. It did not turn. For one painful second, she felt foolish. Then she pushed the key deeper, lifted it slightly, and tried again. This time, the lock gave. A soft click. Tiny, but in that quiet house, it sounded like someone answering from the past. Renee opened the little door. Inside was not a room. It was a narrow crawl space tucked beneath the stairs, barely large enough to hold what someone wanted hidden from careless eyes. A stale breath of air came out first, carrying the smell of dust, paper, and cedar. Renee reached in. Her fingers touched cloth. She pulled out one bundle wrapped in oilcloth, then another, then a flat wooden case with a rusted latch, then a metal recipe box, heavier than it looked. She carried everything to the kitchen table and sat down. For a long moment, she did not open any of it. She just stared. Because the strange thing about finding something hidden is that the world changes before the object does. The house felt different now. Not bigger, not safer, just awake. Renee opened the recipe box first. She expected recipes, maybe old index cards, peach preserves, biscuit measurements, cornbread notes. Instead, she found receipts, dozens of them, folded carefully, sorted by year, some brittle at the edges, some tucked into envelopes with names written across the front. Property tax receipts, county notices, certified mail slips, copies of payments made in cash, check, and money order. Alma Reeves had kept everything. Renee turned over one receipt and saw her mother's name. Della Whitaker. Her hands went still. She read the line again. Della's name appeared beside a parcel reference Renee did not understand. The date was years before Renee was old enough to remember anything clearly. Another receipt carried Alma's name. Another mentioned a boundary adjustment. Another had a handwritten note in the corner. Della paid her part. Do not lose this. Renee sat back slowly. The kitchen seemed to tilt. All those years, family stories had made Della sound like someone who drifted away from old land, old duties, old ties. But the papers on the table suggested something else. Della had paid. Della had been connected. Della had not simply walked away. Renee opened the oilcloth bundle next. Inside were letters, some written by Alma, some sent to her, some from law offices Renee had never heard of. The language was formal, but the pattern underneath was not hard to feel. Requests, follow-ups, reminders, offers. Pressure dressed as patience. Different dates, different letterheads, same desire. Someone had wanted Alma to sign. Again and again. Renee found no single page that explained everything. That would have been too easy. Instead, the truth came like a shape behind fog. A line about access, a note about family acreage, a reference to a strip behind the residence, a refusal written in Alma's tight handwriting. No right of passage granted. Renee whispered the words without meaning to. Then she stopped herself and looked toward the front room. Maddie was still asleep. Good. This was not yet for a child. The flat wooden case came last. Its latch resisted, then opened with a dry scrape. Inside were maps, old survey copies, folded along worn lines, property sketches, boundary markings, pencil notes, red circles around places Renee had walked without understanding. She spread one map across the table. Her eyes searched until she found the farmhouse, a small square near the front road. Behind it, a narrow strip ran past the smokehouse and toward the larger wooded tract beyond. The same direction as the tire tracks, the same direction as the orange flags, the same direction Hollis had pointed. That strip had been circled in red. Beside it, in Alma's handwriting, were 5 words. They cannot cross without me. Renee stared at the sentence until the letters seemed to deepen into the paper. Not they should not. Not they might not. Cannot. A legal word hiding inside a woman's stubborn hand. The lawyer's letter came back to Renee's mind. Misunderstanding. Premature occupancy. Relocation assistance. Now those words sounded different. Smaller. Less polite. More afraid. Renee lowered herself into the chair. The farmhouse was quiet except for Maddie breathing in the next room and the old refrigerator clicking uselessly in the corner. Outside, the dark field waited behind the house. For the first time, Renee understood why no one had cared when she was sleeping in a van, and why they cared now. She had not inherited a broken farmhouse by accident. She had inherited the thing Alma had refused to give them. Renee gathered the maps carefully. Then she noticed one envelope still inside the wooden case, flat against the bottom. It was not labeled by year. It was not addressed to a lawyer. It had only one word written across the front in faded ink. Renee. Renee did not open the envelope at first. She only held it. The paper was old and soft at the edges, the kind of paper that had waited too long in a dark place. Her name sat across the front in Alma's faded handwriting. Not Renee Whitaker. Not a legal name. Just Renee. That made it harder to touch. For a moment the kitchen felt too quiet. The maps were still spread across the table. The receipts sat in careful piles. The lawyer's letter waited beside them like a clean lie dressed in expensive paper. In the next room, Maddie slept under 2 blankets on the floor. Renee looked toward her. Then, back at the envelope. All her life, she had known what it felt like to be remembered only when someone needed something. A favor, a ride, a shift covered, a loan paid back, a family obligation no one else wanted. But this felt different. This felt like someone had remembered her before she ever arrived. Renee slid one finger under the flap and opened it. Inside was a single folded page. Alma's handwriting was smaller here than it had been on the maps, less steady. Some words leaned into each other. Others faded where the ink had thinned. Renee read slowly. Alma did not waste time explaining what she feared. She wrote like a woman who had already spent years being ignored. She wrote that people would call the farmhouse worthless until the day they needed it. She wrote that nobody should hurry Renee into signing anything. She wrote that Della had not walked away from the family land the way people claimed. Della had been pushed, not loudly, not in one clean act, but with papers she was told not to question, meetings she was not invited to, promises that never found their way into records. Renee stopped reading. Her mother's name blurred for a second. Della had been dead for years, but grief can wake up suddenly when someone finally says the thing nobody would say while the person was alive. Renee had spent half her life thinking her mother simply carried sadness. Now she wondered how much of that sadness had been stolen from her first. She kept reading. Alma wrote that she had tried to keep one piece from being swallowed. The house. The narrow strip. The records. She wrote that she had been called stubborn because stubborn was easier to say than honest. Then came the line at the bottom, the one Alma had underlined twice. Make them say it in court if they want it so bad. Renee sat back. Those words did not make her brave. Not immediately. They made her tired in a new way. Because now, she knew the fight was real. Until that moment, part of her had still hoped there was a simpler answer. A mistake, a misunderstanding, a family argument that had grown too large in her imagination. But Alma's note took that comfort away. The relatives had not just appeared. They had continued something. And Renee had walked into the middle of it with $6, a sleeping child, and no idea that her name had been waiting in a locked space beneath the stairs. She folded the note once, then unfolded it again. Make them say it in court. The words felt impossible. Renee had never liked courtrooms. She had only seen them from the wrong side of money. Places where rent became judgment, where unpaid bills became public, where people with folders spoke calmly about other people's lives. The idea of standing in one against relatives with lawyers made her stomach twist. But then she looked toward the front room, where Maddie's backpack leaned against the wall. That backpack had become a kind of test every morning, if it was still there. If no one had made them leave. If Maddie could pick it up from the same place, then the world had held for one more day. Renee placed Alma's note beside the $11.18 receipt. Two small pieces of paper. One had opened the door. The other told her why people wanted it closed. The next morning, Renee began sorting. Not beautifully, not professionally. She used what she had: grocery bags, rubber bands, envelopes, a spiral notebook Maddie had not used for school yet. She made piles across Alma's kitchen table. Receipts, maps, letters, county notices, things with Della's name, things with Alma's signature, things she did not understand yet. Maddie woke and stood in the doorway, rubbing one eye. Renee almost swept everything back into the wooden case. Then she stopped. Secrets had protected the papers for years, but secrets had also protected the people who made the damage. So she let Maddie see the table. Not everything. Enough. Maddie sat across from her and started helping without being asked. She wrote dates on small slips of paper. She placed matching envelopes together. She smoothed curled receipts with both hands, serious as a clerk. Renee watched her daughter work and felt something sharp and tender at the same time. A child should not have to help her mother build a defense, but Maddie was not frightened by the papers. She was steadied by them. After so many months of having no proof that tomorrow would be better than today, proof itself felt like comfort. By afternoon, the kitchen had changed. It no longer looked like a room in an abandoned farmhouse. It looked like a place where a woman was learning how not to disappear. Names were written on notebook pages, dates lined up. A map was taped flat at the corners with small strips of masking tape. Alma's sentence sat in the center of the table. They cannot cross without me. Beside it, Renee placed the second sentence. Make them say it in court. For the first time since the lawyer's card appeared, Renee did not feel only chased. She felt warned. There was a difference. Being chased meant running from someone else's plan. Being warned meant someone had left her time to prepare. That evening, while Maddie washed the chipped coffee mug in a bowl of warm water, another envelope arrived. Not in the mailbox, tucked into the front door. Renee saw it when she went to shake dust from the broom outside. Cream-colored, thick. Same law firm, same sharp printing in the corner. Her hand tightened around the broom handle. She opened it at the kitchen table. This letter was shorter, colder. It said any documents, records, maps, or personal property found inside the farmhouse might belong to the estate and should be preserved for review. It warned that removing, concealing, or altering such materials could affect the pending claim. Renee read the sentence again. Documents, records, maps, not furniture, not dishes, not the cracked mirror, maps. She looked at the table, at the piles, at Alma's note, at the red circle on the old survey. The relatives did not know exactly what she had found, but they knew enough to be afraid of it. Maddie stood beside her now, quiet. Renee folded the letter and placed it with the others. She did not cry. She did not panic. She only reached for the spiral notebook and wrote one new heading at the top of a clean page. Things they asked for after I found them. Then she looked toward the dark window, where the backfield had already disappeared into night. Somewhere beyond that glass was the strip Alma had refused to give away. Somewhere beyond it were people who thought a homeless mother would be easier to move than an old woman had been. Renee touched Alma's note with 2 fingers. The farmhouse no longer felt like charity. It felt like testimony. And by morning, she would have to find someone who knew how to read it. By sunrise, Renee had turned Alma's kitchen table into something that looked almost official. Almost. The papers were still held down by soup cans and chipped mugs, the maps still curled at the edges. The spiral notebook had coffee stains on the cover, and Maddie's pencil marks ran darker in some places where she had pressed too hard. But the mess had order now. Dates, names, receipts, letters, questions Renee did not yet know how to ask properly. That mattered, because fear was loudest when everything was scattered. Renee packed the documents into 2 grocery bags and 1 old tote with a broken zipper. She placed Alma's note in her purse, separate from everything else. Not because it was the most legal piece of paper, because it was the one that kept her standing. Maddie watched from the hallway. She had brushed her hair and put on the cleanest school shirt she had. The collar was slightly stretched, but she had tucked it in anyway. Renee wanted to say something comforting. Instead, she checked the window. No white truck. No strange car. No one parked near the backfield. Still, she locked the door twice before they left. The county recorder's office sat in the same brick building where Renee had paid the $11.18 balance. This time, walking through the door felt different. The first time, she had come with coins. Now she came with proof. Or at least, with the hope that some of it was proof. The clerk at the counter was the same woman from before. Gray hair pinned low, reading glasses hanging from a chain. A face that did not give away much. She recognized Renee. Renee could tell by the way her eyes moved from Renee's face to the grocery bags, then back again. There was no warmth exactly, but there was a tension. Renee explained that she had found old papers in Alma Reeves's farmhouse and needed to understand what matched the county record. The clerk did not ask why. She only lowered her voice and told Renee that public records could be searched by parcel number, owner name, and recording date. Then she paused. Alma used to come in that way, the clerk said. With folders, with questions, with the same careful look on her face. Renee felt the words move through her slowly. Alma had not just hidden papers. She had been building a trail. The clerk led Renee to a public computer and showed her how to search the property file. Not legal advice, not family help, just procedure. But sometimes procedure was enough to open a door. Renee typed Alma's name first. The screen filled with entries she did not understand. Dates, tax references, boundary notations, recording numbers, old parcel descriptions that sounded more like riddles than land. She wrote everything down. Slowly, Maddie sat beside her, quiet and serious, copying numbers into the notebook whenever Renee pointed. At first, Renee felt embarrassed by how little she knew. Then she remembered something Alma had written. Do not sign quickly. Maybe not knowing was not the shame. Maybe pretending to know was how people got trapped. The clerk returned with a thin folder from an older file cabinet. She said some records had never been digitized because they were too old or too poorly scanned. Inside were copies of documents that made Renee's chest tighten. A boundary adjustment from the late 1980s. A tax receipt connected to Della Whitaker. A recorded notice involving Alma's parcel and family acreage behind it. A road maintenance note that mentioned access but did not explain enough. Renee laid Alma's map beside the county copy. The lines were not identical, but they were close. Close enough that the red circle on Alma's map suddenly felt less like an old woman's suspicion and more like memory backed by ink. The clerk looked at the 2 papers. She did not say much, but her face changed. Just a little. That was enough for Renee to notice. The clerk said there was someone Renee should talk to. A retired surveyor named Benton Vale, who had worked land disputes in that county before half the current roads had names. He was old now, lived outside town, did not answer the phone unless he felt like it. But he still came to the diner near the courthouse, most afternoons for coffee. Renee did not know whether to trust the suggestion. Then the clerk added one more thing. Alma had asked for copies of those same records more than once. Not once, more than once. Renee thanked her, but the word felt too small. Outside, Maddie climbed into the van and asked if the papers were good or bad. Renee looked at the tote between them. She wanted to answer quickly. She wanted to say good, but the truth was stranger than that. The papers were not good or bad. They were alive. They were connected to people who had lied, waited, pushed, denied, and measured land in the dark. So Renee told Maddie they were important. That was honest enough. The diner near the courthouse smelled of coffee, fryer oil, and old vinyl seats. Benton Vale sat in the back booth with a paper cup and a folded newspaper he did not seem to be reading. He was thin, white-haired, with hands that looked too large for the rest of him. His shirt pocket held 2 pens and a small metal ruler. He did not smile when Renee introduced herself, but when she said Alma Reeves, he looked up. That name still had weight. Renee unfolded the map carefully on the table. Benton did not touch it at first. He only leaned over, studying the lines, the notes, the red circle. Then he pulled his glasses from his shirt pocket and put them on. That was when Renee felt the room narrow around them. Benton tapped one finger near the strip behind the farmhouse. Not the house, not the yard, the strip. He said land could sit quiet for 30 years, then become valuable because somebody needed a way through it. Renee listened without moving. Benton traced the line from the county road past the old smokehouse and toward the larger tract behind the property. He did not make it dramatic. That made it worse. He said the strip was the cleanest access to the back acreage. Without it, anyone trying to develop that land would need a harder route, a more expensive route, or permission from someone else who might not give it. Renee looked at Maddie. Maddie was staring at the map with the stillness of a child who understood just enough to be afraid. Benton sat back. Then he asked whether anyone had offered Renee money yet. Renee did not answer right away. She did not have to. His face told her he already knew. The diner noise seemed to fade. Forks against plates, a waitress calling an order, someone laughing near the counter. All of it kept happening while Renee sat there understanding that the offer was not kindness. It was a discount, a cheap price placed on her ignorance. Benton pointed once more to the red circle. He said Alma knew what that strip meant. Maybe not all the modern development plans, maybe not every number or company or deal, but she knew enough not to sign. Renee folded the map with careful hands. For the first time, the farmhouse did not feel like something she had stumbled into. It felt like something she had been handed with instructions buried inside it. When they left the diner, the sky had gone pale with late afternoon heat. Renee placed the map on the passenger seat and buckled the tote beside it, as if paper could need protection like a person. On the drive back, Maddie did not ask if they were safe. She asked if Grandma Della had known. Renee kept both hands on the wheel. That question reached deeper than the land. Because if Della had known, then something had been taken. And if she had not known, then maybe something had been stolen so quietly she never had the chance to fight it. Renee did not have an answer. Not yet. When they reached the farmhouse, she saw no trucks in the field, no men by the fence, no business card in the door. For one small second, the place looked peaceful. Then Renee noticed the mailbox. The lid was open. She knew she had closed it before they left. Inside was another cream-colored envelope from the law firm. This one was thicker than the others. And written across the front in black ink were 4 words that made Renee's hand go cold. Notice of formal claim. Renee did not open the envelope outside. She stood at the mailbox with the thick cream paper in her hand and felt the whole yard watching her. The farmhouse was quiet behind her. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made every small sound feel like it had meaning. Grass shifting against the fence. The loose shutter tapping once against the siding. Maddie's door closing softly inside the house. Renee looked toward the back field. No truck. No men. No orange flags moving except the ones already there. Still, the envelope felt heavier than paper should. Notice of formal claim. 4 words. No shouting. No threat written in red. No angry face in the yard. Just 4 printed words, carrying enough weight to make her fingers tighten around the edge. She carried it inside and placed it on Alma's kitchen table. The table was already crowded with maps, receipts, notes, and the spiral notebook Maddie had helped organize. Renee stood over all of it, not touching anything for a few seconds. Then she opened the envelope. The letter said certain family members were formally challenging the transfer of Alma Reeves's farmhouse parcel. It said there were concerns about Alma's capacity near the end of her life. It said Renee's occupancy should be reviewed. It said the property contained materials that could be relevant to the estate. And then, near the bottom, it used the phrase that made Renee sit down. Fitness of the current occupant. Renee read it twice, then a third time. They were not just questioning the house now. They were questioning her. Not directly. That would have looked cruel. Instead, they wrapped it in careful language. Current living conditions. Minor child present. Safety concerns. Financial instability. Renee could hear what they were really saying. She was homeless. She was poor. She was tired. She had a child. So maybe she could be pushed. Maddie came into the kitchen and stopped when she saw her mother's face. Renee folded the letter before Maddie could read it. Not because she wanted to hide everything, because some words should not be allowed to touch a child before they had to. She told Maddie to finish sorting the maybe pile in her room. Her voice stayed calm, but Maddie looked at her long enough to know calm was not always the truth. By late afternoon, the knock came. Not a hard knock. That would have been easier. This one was controlled, measured. 3 polite taps on the front door, as if whoever stood outside had already decided the house was not really Renee's. She looked through the front window. 3 people stood in the yard. Harlan Reeves, tall and square-shouldered, with a pressed shirt that looked wrong against the weeds. His sister, Lenora Pike, wearing sunglasses though the sun had already shifted behind the trees. And beside them, a man in a navy jacket holding a folder against his chest. The lawyer. Renee had not seen Harlan or Lenora since a funeral years ago. Back then, they had hugged her like distant family and forgotten her before the parking lot emptied. Now they had come all the way to Alma's farmhouse. That told Renee more than their letter had. She opened the door but left the screen latched. A small thing. Still, it mattered. The porch boards creaked under Harlan's shoes. Lenora stayed near the steps, looking past Renee into the hallway, as if she were already inspecting what could be used against her. The lawyer spoke first. His voice was smooth, not warm. Smooth. He explained that everyone wanted to avoid unnecessary conflict. The family believed there had been confusion around Alma's final wishes. Renee's presence in the home complicated matters. A more practical solution could help everyone move forward. Move forward. Renee held on to those words. People always wanted you to move forward when they were tired of you standing where you were. Harlan added that no one was trying to hurt her. That almost made Renee laugh. Not because it was funny, because people who were not trying to hurt you rarely arrived with an attorney. Lenora looked toward the hallway again and asked whether Maddie was staying there full time. The question was soft. The meaning was not. Renee felt heat rise in her face, but she kept her hand on the doorframe and said nothing more than she needed to. The lawyer opened the folder. The offer had changed. The amount was higher now, enough to sound generous if someone did not know why they were paying it, enough to make a person remember empty gas tanks, unpaid bills, and a child sleeping under thin blankets. But Renee had seen the map. She had heard Benton Vale tap the table. She had read Alma's note. So, the money did not look like help anymore. It looked like a lid, something meant to close over the truth before it got air. Harlan's tone shifted when Renee did not reach for the papers. He said court could take months. He said repairs would cost more than the house was worth. He said developers did not wait forever. Then he stopped himself. But too late. Renee caught it. Developers. The word hung there between them. Not estate. Not family. Developers. Lenora's mouth tightened. The lawyer glanced down at his folder. For the first time since they arrived, the smoothness cracked. Renee did not pounce on it. She did not accuse anyone. She did not shout. She simply stood there, with the screen door between them and Alma's house at her back. That restraint did more than anger would have. It made them keep talking. Lenora stepped closer. She said Renee needed to think about Maddie. A place like this could invite questions. Social workers, school concerns, safety inspections. It would be unfortunate if things became harder than they had to be. There it was. Not a threat. Worse, a suggestion dressed like concern. Renee's fingers tightened on the frame. For 1 second, she was back in the minivan behind the laundromat, counting coins, trying to make $6 become shelter. They knew that version of her existed, and they were trying to bring her back into the room. Then Harlan said it, quietly, almost kindly. A woman in her situation should be realistic. Renee looked at him for a long moment. Her situation. He meant the van. He meant the money. He meant Maddie. He meant every vulnerable thing he thought could be used as a handle. But in Renee's mind, another voice rose. Almas. Make them say it in court if they want it so bad. Renee did not open the screen door. She did not take the papers. She did not ask for time to think. She told them the matter could go through the proper channels. That was all. One sentence. Plain. Shaking at the edges, maybe. But said. The lawyer closed the folder slowly. Harlan stared at her, as if he had misread the room. Lenora looked past Renee one last time, toward the hallway where Maddie had gone quiet. Then they left. Their car doors closed one after another. The engine started. Gravel shifted under the tires as they backed out and drove away from the house they had called worthless until Renee refused to leave it. Only when the road went silent did Renee unlock the screen door. She stepped onto the porch. Her knees weakened so fast she had to sit down on the top step. The whole yard blurred, not from tears at first, from the body finally admitting what the face had hidden. Inside, Maddie came to the doorway and sat beside her without asking a question. She placed one small hand over Renee's. Renee turned her palm upward and held it. No speech could have done more. For a few minutes, they sat like that on the leaning porch of a house that had just become a battleground. Then Maddie looked toward the backfield. Renee followed her gaze. Near the orange stakes, beyond the smokehouse, something white had been tied to the fence. A folded paper, moving gently in the evening air. Renee stood slowly. The relatives had left, but someone had stayed close enough to leave one more message. Renee did not run toward the fence. She wanted to. Every nerve in her body told her to move fast, to snatch the white paper down before the wind took it, before someone stepped out from the trees, before Maddie saw more than she needed to see. But rushing had become dangerous. Rushing was what people wanted from her. Sign quickly, leave quickly, decide quickly, disappear quickly. So Renee made herself slow down. She told Maddie to stay on the porch. Then she walked across the yard with her shoulders straight and her hands empty, though her heart was moving faster than her feet. The paper had been tied to the old fence with a strip of twine. Not taped, not tossed. Tied. That bothered her. It meant whoever left it had not been passing by. They had taken their time. Renee untied the paper and unfolded it. At first, it looked like a photocopy of a map, not Alma's old map. A newer one, cleaner lines, darker ink, a survey stamp in the corner. The farmhouse parcel was outlined, but the back strip had been shaded with a yellow marker. Across it, someone had written 3 words in block letters. Sign or lose. Renee stood there until the words stopped swimming. No name, no letterhead, no polite legal language. Just the thing all the other letters had been trying to say without saying it. She folded the page once and looked toward the road. Empty. Then toward the tree line. Still. But the quiet did not comfort her anymore. When she returned to the porch, Maddie was standing up. Renee did not show her the words. She only said it was another paper about the land. That was true enough and not enough. But mothers sometimes speak in half-truths when the whole truth is too large for a child's chest. That night, Renee did not sleep. She sat at Alma's kitchen table with the new map beside the old one, and the difference between them made her cold. Alma's map had been careful, worn, marked by hand over years. This new one looked fresh, prepared, current. Someone had already gone farther than Renee understood. By morning, she knew she could not keep trying to read the fight alone. She packed everything again. Not all of it this time, only what mattered most. The $11.18 receipt. Alma's note, the old map, the new marked copy from the fence, the formal claim letter, the relocation offer, the receipts with Della's name, the letters asking Alma to sign. She placed them in a folder borrowed from Maddie's school supplies, the kind with bent corners and a faded cartoon sun on the front. It was not the kind of folder people took to legal appointments. It was what she had. And by then, Renee had stopped apologizing to herself for what she had. The legal aid office sat in a converted storefront near downtown Macon, between a tax prep business and a place that repaired cracked phone screens. The waiting room was full before 10. An old man with oxygen tubing, a young mother bouncing a baby on her knee, A warehouse worker still wearing steel-toed boots. A woman holding a folder with both hands like it might run away. Renee recognized that grip. She had it too. When her name was finally called, she walked into a small office where a woman in a green sweater sat behind a desk stacked with files. Marisol Keene was younger than Renee expected, but her eyes were not young. They had the steady look of someone who had heard too many people explain how they were almost safe before everything collapsed. Renee began with the farmhouse, then stopped, because the farmhouse was not the beginning anymore. So she began again. She told Marisol about the minivan, the letter, the $11.18 balance, the county receipt, Alma, the lawyer's card, the orange flags, Hollis, Benton Vale, the locked pantry, the old maps, the new map tied to the fence. Marisol listened without interrupting. That alone nearly undid Renee. So many people had interrupted her life with advice, with judgment, with shortcuts, with reasons she should take less and be grateful. Marisol only listened. Then she opened the folder, one page at a time. Renee watched her face for signs of disbelief, a raised eyebrow, a polite smile. That little shift people make when they decide your story is too messy to be useful. It never came. Marisol sorted the papers into separate piles. Ownership, pressure, land access, family history, threats. Renee stared at the piles. The same papers that had looked like confusion on Alma's kitchen table looked different under Marisol's hands. Not solved, but seen. Marisol explained that truth and evidence were not the same thing. Truth was what happened. Evidence was what could survive someone denying it. That sentence stayed in the room. Renee thought of Della, of Alma, of the photograph marked after they came, of all the years when family stories had been told by the people loud enough to keep talking. Maybe that was why Alma kept receipts. Maybe she knew memory alone could be bullied. Paper was harder. Marisol said the $11.18 receipt mattered because it showed Renee cleared the outstanding balance properly. The probate notice mattered because it tied her to the transfer. The old letters mattered because they showed Alma had been pressured before. The maps mattered because the same strip appeared across different records. And the new paper from the fence. Marisol paused over that one. That was the first time Renee saw anger on her face. Not loud anger. Controlled anger. The useful kind. Marisol said anonymous intimidation was different from formal legal notice. She asked if Renee had touched the flags, moved any documents, or signed anything. Renee said no. For the first time all morning, that answer felt like strength. Not because she had known what she was doing, because she had been too cautious to make their job easy. Marisol made copies of everything. Then she wrote down 3 tasks for Renee. Do not sign anything. Do not surrender original documents without a receipt and legal review. Document every visit, letter, vehicle, and threat. Renee copied the list in her own notebook. The words were simple. That helped. After years of feeling like life was written in language designed to exclude her, simple instructions felt like a handrail. Before Renee left, Marisol asked one more question. Had the relatives mentioned development before Renee discovered the access issue? Renee remembered Harlan on the porch. Developers do not wait forever. She nodded. Marisol wrote that down slowly, slower than the other notes. Renee noticed. On the drive home, the folder sat on the passenger seat, thicker now with copies and marked tabs. Maddie was still at school, and for the first time in days, Renee had 20 minutes alone with her own thoughts. She did not feel safe, but she felt less blind. That was not the same thing. It was enough for one afternoon. When she reached the farmhouse, she saw no one by the fence. No white truck, no relatives on the porch, only the house, waiting in the light like it had been holding its breath with her. Renee carried the folder inside and placed it on Alma's kitchen table. Then she opened her notebook and wrote the date. Under it, she wrote, fence map, 3 words, sign or lose. Her hand shook only once. Then she added, I did not sign. The next morning, Marisol called. The relatives had filed a hearing request. Not a letter now, not an offer, not a card in the door, a court date. Renee stood in Alma's kitchen with the phone pressed to her ear, watching Maddie's backpack lean against the wall of the little room. The fight had moved out of the yard. Now it had a room waiting for them at the courthouse. The courthouse looked too calm for what it could take from her. Low brick walls, clean windows, a flag moving gently above the steps. Renee sat in the parking lot with both hands on the steering wheel, Alma's wooden case on the passenger seat beside her. Maddie was at school. Renee had made sure of that. Whatever happened inside, her daughter did not need to hear adults question whether the first roof they had found was safe enough to keep. Marisol waited near the entrance with a folder under one arm. She did not give Renee a speech. She only nodded once, steady and quiet. That helped. Inside, the hearing room was smaller than Renee expected. A few benches, 2 tables, a judge's desk. No crowd, no drama, just a room where polite words could change a life. Harlan and Lenora were already seated. Their attorney had neat folders stacked in front of him. Behind them sat a man in a gray suit Renee did not recognize. But she knew what he was. Not family, business. Renee sat beside Marisol and placed Alma's wooden case under the table, close to her foot. The relative's attorney spoke first. He made everything sound reasonable. Alma had been elderly. The transfer raised questions. Renee's occupancy was sudden. The house had safety concerns. A minor child was involved. The family only wanted fairness. Renee kept her face still. Family fairness had not found her behind the laundromat. But now, with land involved, it had arrived in a suit. Marisol did not interrupt. She let him finish. Then she opened her folder and started with the record. Renee Whitaker was named in the probate notice. The unpaid county balance was $11.18. The balance had been paid. The receipt was dated. The property file was cleared. The transfer had been recorded. Plain sentence after plain sentence. No begging. No performance. No shame. For the first time, Renee understood the strength of a clean record. Then Marisol brought out Alma's papers, letters asking Alma to sign access documents, county copies Alma had requested, tax receipts tied to Della Whitaker, boundary notes, the old map with the red circle. The judge leaned forward when the map appeared. Marisol pointed to the strip behind the farmhouse, past the smokehouse, toward the larger land beyond it, the same direction as the tire tracks. The same place the orange flags had marked. The room changed quietly. The judge asked when the relatives first learned a developer was interested in the back acreage. Their attorney answered carefully, too carefully. Then the judge asked if Renee had been told about that interest before the relocation offer. A pause. Small, but heavy. The judge asked why the farmhouse had been called a burden if the papers kept returning to access, maps, and land behind it. This pause was longer. Renee looked across the room. Harlan's mouth had tightened. Lenora stared down at her purse. The man in the gray suit shifted in his seat. Marisol did not smile. She only placed the next paper forward, the copy tied to Renee's fence. Sign or lose. The attorney said there was no proof his clients had left it there. Marisol did not argue that point too hard. She did not need to. The pattern was already in the room. The card, the letters, the offers, the warning, the pressure about Maddie, the formal claim after Renee refused to leave. One thing could be explained away. A pattern could not. Then Marisol read one short part of Alma's note. People would call the farmhouse worthless until they needed it. Renee should not sign quickly. Della had deserved better. Renee looked down at the table. Alma's words were no longer hidden beneath the stairs. They were being heard. The relative's attorney argued that Alma's note did not prove ownership. Marisol agreed. Then she pointed back to the probate notice, the paid balance, the transfer record, and the survey references. The note did not create Renee's claim. It explained why Alma had protected it. That landed. The judge asked Renee one question. Why had she paid the balance and moved into the farmhouse? Renee's throat tightened. She could have said many things. Because she had nowhere else. Because her daughter needed a door. Because Alma left it to her. Because $11.18 had become the difference between sleeping in a van and sleeping behind a lock. But she kept it simple. She had been named as heir, and she needed a safe place for her child. Her voice shook once. Only once. The judge looked down at the papers. The room waited. Then the ruling came. The broader land issues were not finished, but Renee's occupancy would stand. The transfer would not be suspended that day. The relatives had not shown enough to remove her from the farmhouse or force her to surrender possession. Renee heard the words before she felt them. She had not won everything, but she was not being put out. That was the first victory. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Harlan passed close enough for Renee to hear him. He said it was not over. This time, the words did not break through her. They sounded different now, less like power, more like frustration. Then Renee saw the man in the gray suit near the parking lot, speaking into his phone. His eyes moved toward her once. Quick, measuring. Marisol followed her gaze. The developer would likely make contact now. Renee held Alma's wooden case closer. They had tried to make her leave before she knew what she had. Now they knew something too. If they wanted a way through Alma's land, they would have to ask the woman they had tried to erase. The developer did not call Renee. He called Marisol. That told Renee enough. People who respected you came to the front door. People who thought you were still easy to handle went around you first. Marisol called the next morning while Renee stood in Alma's kitchen, washing Maddie's cereal bowl in a plastic basin. The company wanted to discuss access. Not the farmhouse. Not family fairness. Not Alma's state of mind. Access. That single word stripped the whole fight bare. For weeks, her relatives had talked about confusion, safety, estate concerns, and what was best for everyone. But the developer's question was cleaner than all of that. How do we get through? Renee looked through the cloudy kitchen window toward the back field. The orange flags still stood there, bright against the grass. For the first time, they did not look like warnings. They looked like proof. Marisol told her not to speak with anyone directly. No calls, no side meetings, no quick signatures. Everything would go through legal review. Renee almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, because a few weeks earlier she had been afraid to open an envelope. Now people with money needed permission to cross land, tied to her name. The first offer came 3 days later. It was more money than Renee had ever seen written beside her name. Enough to repair the van. Enough to pay old bills. Enough to buy Maddie shoes without checking the clearance rack first. For a moment, fear whispered the old way. Take it. Do not risk more. But then Marisol explained the language. The offer was not just for a simple path through the backfield. It gave the company broad control over the route, future work, maintenance access, and land use in ways that could follow Renee for years. It sounded temporary. It was not. Renee looked at Alma's note. Do not sign quickly. So she did not. The second offer came higher. That one mentioned cooperation, delay, reasonable compromise. It was softer on the surface and sharper underneath. Renee had learned that kind of language by then. Reasonable often meant tired people should accept less. She said no again, not loudly, not proudly, just no. The meeting happened in Marisol's office the following week. Renee wore the same thrift store blazer from the hearing. This time, it did not feel like a costume. Across the table sat the developer's attorney and a project manager who kept checking his watch until Marisol looked at him once. Then he stopped. The relatives were not in the room. That alone felt like a victory. For once, nobody was speaking over Renee in the name of family. The company wanted a route. Renee wanted her home protected. Those were the two truths on the table. Marisol laid out the terms. Limited right-of-way. No ownership transfer. No access through the yard. No construction traffic near the farmhouse. Company-paid fencing. Drainage protection. Repair responsibility. Annual maintenance payments. A fair settlement large enough to make the house livable without forcing Renee to sell it. The developer's attorney called some terms unusual. Renee looked at him. Unusual did not scare her anymore. Unusual was what people said when they expected you to be grateful for less. The project manager said they had timelines. Renee thought of Maddie in the back of the minivan, asking if they were still homeless. She thought of the screen door card, the fence warning, the words, sign or lose, Alma's papers waiting in the dark. Then she said the route would not come through her life, unless her life was protected. The room went quiet. Renee did not rush to fill it. That was new too. The men stepped outside to make a call. When they returned, the answer was not perfect, but it was enough. They accepted the limited right-of-way framework. The final wording would still need review, but the shape of the deal had changed. They were no longer trying to move Renee out. They were negotiating how to move around her. That evening, Renee found Maddie sitting on the porch steps with a library book open on her knees. For 1 second, Renee just watched her. No blanket in the back seat. No backpack clutched like luggage. No question about where they would park. Just a child on a porch, waiting at home. Renee sat beside her and said the words carefully. They were staying. Maddie leaned into her side without speaking. Across the field, the orange flags moved gently in the wind. They no longer marked the place strangers wanted to take. They marked the line Renee had finally learned not to cross against herself. 1 year later, the farmhouse still looked old, but it no longer looked abandoned. The porch held under Renee's feet now. The front door closed without lifting the handle. The kitchen light stayed steady when the wind moved through the trees. Maddie's room had curtains, pale yellow ones she picked herself from a clearance bin in Macon. The house was not perfect. The hallway floor still dipped in one place. The smokehouse still leaned. The back field still needed more work than Renee could do in one season. But every morning Maddie walked out of that house with her backpack on her shoulders, and every afternoon the school bus brought her back to the same place. That was what mattered. Not perfect, steady. The agreement with the developer did not make Renee rich overnight. Real life rarely works that way, but it gave her breathing room, enough to repair the roof, enough to fix the plumbing, enough to put savings away for Maddie, enough to stop measuring every problem against the fear of losing everything again. The relatives never apologized. Harlan did not come back to explain himself. Lenora never admitted what the family had tried to do. The lawyer's letters stopped, but the silence that followed was not regret. Renee learned to live without their apology. That became its own kind of freedom. Some people never give you closure. They only lose the power to hurt you. On the wall beside the back door, Renee hung the receipt from the county office. Shi mei yuan shiba mei fen. Visitors sometimes noticed it and asked why anyone would frame something so small. Renee never gave the whole story first. She only said it was the day her name came back. And that was true. That receipt was not proof that she bought a house. It was proof that she had stepped into a record other people hoped would stay quiet. It was proof that a forgotten balance, a broken farmhouse, and an old woman's careful papers had done what no one expected. They gave a homeless mother a place to stand. One evening, while cleaning the attic, Renee found one final photograph tucked behind a loose board. It showed Alma, Della, and Renee as a little girl on the farmhouse porch. Renee was holding something in both hands, maybe a biscuit, maybe a folded napkin. Della stood stiff beside her. Alma stood behind them both, one hand resting near Della's shoulder. On the back, in faded handwriting, Alma had written, "For Renee, if she ever needs home." Renee sat on the attic floor for a long time. For years, she had thought her family history was made only of people who forgot, took, lied, or looked away. But one woman had remembered. Quietly, carefully, legally. Enough. That night, Renee placed the photograph in the kitchen cabinet where she kept the coffee mugs. Not hidden, just private. A reminder she would see every morning before the day asked anything from her. Outside, Maddie was laughing in the yard, trying to keep a tomato plant upright with a crooked stake. Renee stood at the sink and watched her. A child laughing in a yard no one could order her out of. A mother standing inside a home she almost lost before she understood its worth. A receipt by the door. A name on the record. A life rebuilt from something everyone else called worthless. Renee had not inherited a miracle. She inherited a fight, but she stayed long enough to discover the truth, and strong enough to protect what was left for her. And sometimes, that is how a comeback begins. Not with applause, not with revenge, but with one tired woman refusing to disappear. If Renee's story moved you, take a second to like this video and subscribe for more stories about people who were underestimated until the truth finally caught up. And here is the question I want you to think about deeply. Was Renee's greatest victory the farmhouse itself, or the moment she stopped believing poverty made her powerless? Share your answer in the comments. I read every one. Thank you for watching to the end.